Fourth sign, John 6, 1 through 15, feeding the 5,000. Later, Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee, also known as Tiberias. A great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he did in healing the sick. Jesus went up on the side of the hill and sat there with his followers. It was almost the time for the Jewish Passover festival. Jesus looked up and saw a crowd of people coming toward him. He said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough bread for all these people to eat?" He asked Philip this question to test him. Jesus already knew what was planned to do. Philip answered, "We would all have to work a month to buy enough bread for each person here to have only a little piece." Another follower there was Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter. Andrew said, "Here is a boy who has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 little fish, but that is not enough for so many people." Jesus said, "Tell everyone to sit down." This was a place with a lot of grass, and about 5,000 men sat there. Jesus took the loaves of bread and gave thanks for them. Then he gave them to the people who were waiting to eat. He did the same with the fish. He gave them as much as they wanted. They all had plenty to eat. When they finished, Jesus said to his followers, "Gather the pieces of fish and bread that were not eaten. Don't waste anything." So they gathered up the pieces that were left. The people had started eating with only 5 loaves of barley bread, but the followers filled 12 large baskets with the pieces of food that were left. The people saw this miraculous sign that Jesus did and said, "He must be the prophet who is coming into the world." Jesus knew that the people planned to come get him and make him their king, so he left and went into the hills alone.
Food miracle for a family. We were living for a time in Salinas, California. It was about 1985. Jeremy and Joanna were 12 and 8, and Matt was a year old. Times were hard financially. I was working 3 jobs, and Marianne was babysitting and cutting people's hair in our home and taking care of our 3 children. Things were unusually difficult one month. We ran out of money and food before we ran out of a month. Marianne said, "We need to pray." And we did. We gathered our children, and the 5 of us prayed for food for the next week. It wasn't long after the prayer, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, there was a knock on our door. One of our elders at the congregation where we worshiped was standing there with several bags of food. He said his daughter had just gotten married, and they had a lot of food left over from the reception. Would we like to have it? You could hear Marianne, as usual, whispering a prayer of thanksgiving. We had been blessed. God had provided. I wish I could tell you I learned from that day forward to trust God, but I'm afraid fear and worry are the 2 sins I have a difficult time giving up.
Food miracle for 5,000 plus. I believe there's a reason why Jesus withdrew to his lonely place by the sea other than just trying to get away from the crowds. The book of John tells us about the death of John the Baptist, but in Matthew 14:13 through 14, that author fills in some details. Matthew tells us that John the Baptist had been put into prison and had just been beheaded. Part of the reason is that Jesus needed time to process his upcoming martyrdom.
When Jesus heard what happened to John, he left in a boat. He went alone to a place where no one lived. But the people heard that Jesus had left, so they left their towns and followed him. They went by land to the same place he went. When Jesus got out of the boat, he saw a large crowd of people. He felt sorry for them, and he healed the ones who were sick.
The other gospel writers don't say anything about the people's motives, but John does. John 6:2 says,
A great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he did in healing the sick.
At first glance, it seems people follow Jesus because he can heal them. But something else changed after the miracle that Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't seem to take up in their narratives. Verse 14 and 15 of John.
The people saw this miraculous sign that Jesus did and said, "He must be the prophet who is coming into the world." Jesus knew that the people planned to come get him and make him their king, so he left and went into the hills alone.
Looking for the wrong kind of Messiah. The people not only saw Jesus as a miracle worker, but as a powerful force to deliver them from Roman domination. The Romans had conquered most of the known world by this time, including the lands of Jesus and his fellow Jews. Most Jews were looking for a savior, a Messiah, who would lead them and save them from the Romans. They were looking for a physical kingdom like the one their forefather David led. Even his closest disciples did not fully understand. Jesus was not the kind of savior or Messiah. Jesus came to save us from the power of bigger enemies than the Romans. He came to save us from Satan, sin, and death. He was the Savior, capital S, and Messiah, capital M. So I will ask you, do you see Jesus as a political solution to your needs and wants? Do you see him as the leader of a political party or movement of violent people wanting to right our nation's wrongs? Do you see him as a Savior and Messiah? Or do you see him as our Savior and our Messiah? Jesus heals the physically sick and feeds the physically hungry who have impure motives. This is very godlike and reminds us that Jesus tells us to pray for our enemies and to do good to those who persecute us. That concept seems so foreign to humans, but Jesus calls the people of his kingdom to be different from those of the world. Thinking out of the box. In verses 5 and 6, Jesus tests his disciples with,
When Jesus looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough bread for all of these people to eat?" He asked Philip this question to test him. Jesus already knew what he planned to do.
Philip sees this problem as impossible, thinking only of the money it would cost. Andrew, at least, goes a little further in his thinking and says, "There is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish." But even Andrew sees the whole thing as irresolvable. Jesus, of course, thinks out of the box. He knows the power of God and uses it to feed the people. Jesus does what only God can do. Now, if you think about it, you know if God could create all that exists out of nothing, and if he fed Israel in the desert for 40 years, surely he can provide food to feed these people. And he does. John tells us there were 5,000 men. Matthew tells us that the number of 5,000 does not include the women and children present. So there were a lot of people. There was also a lot of food left over. Jesus doesn't waste a thing. He and the disciples gathered up the leftovers,